Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome back to my channel. It is International Women's Month. Now I know International Women's Day has just passed, but I wanted to give you a list of 10 books that empower and are written by women. These are going to be 5 nonfiction and 5 fiction. I want to start by giving props to Haynes18, the YouTuber by that name. I hope I said it right. She made a list of 10 nonfiction books she recommended for International Women's Day, and I thought it was a great idea. So that was what inspired me to do this. So let's start with perhaps the most powerful book I've ever read, and that's going to be Maya Angelou's I Know When the Caged Birds Sing. This is a powerful and beautifully written memoir about her early life and the experiences she had to go through. And this deals with various issues from poverty to what it was like being a black girl. It is so raw and emotional, and when you listen to her narrate the audiobook, it gives an added level of raw emotion to it that it's hard not to feel a very strong connection to this book in a way that I think just other books fail to do. One of the most powerful books I've ever read. Honestly, I haven't read it in like 5 years at least. I probably need to reread it. Definitely recommend it. Maybe I should do a buddy read. That would be so much fun, actually. But you know what? Moving on. Next is another powerful memoir that is a favorite of mine, and that is Hunger by Roxane Gay. Now, Haynes18 also mentioned this one, and this is her memoir about her experience dealing with her weight and her hunger. And this was another powerful and beautifully written story, also beautifully performed by her. And this deals with more than just her weight, but her weight is a big conversation about what it's like being a bigger woman, especially in a society that has so many expectations around what a woman should look like. Men too, but women especially. And it's just a beautifully open and just also very cleverly written book. There's something about Roxane Gay, if you haven't read her, that is just so, I don't know, it's almost laughable despite how dark it can be at times because of how clever she is. Next is another memoir, and that is going to be They Said This Would Be Fun by Trinity Martis. Now, Trinity Martis was a undergrad student here at Western University, a student that I study at in London, Ontario, and this is about her experience as a black woman here at Western and about her dealing with the very toxic environment that's here, both in terms of sexism and in the form of racism. And she talks about how our institution, Western University, has tolerated and allowed this kind of stuff to flourish so well at this quote-unquote party school. But she also talks about how it's not unique to Western either, how this exists for pretty much all universities across North America, especially in Ontario and Canada. And she really brings to light something that I think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, particularly in Ontario and at Western, is because Western isn't the most diverse place, particularly London, Ontario. This book really explains why that is, because of how toxic an experience it is, not just to be a woman, but to be a black woman at that, to deal with the racism from all sides, from the students you go to school with, to the teachers that you have to deal with, and then just the social environment all around it, and this from the most extreme slurs she has to endure to the most common everyday microaggressions that are more often than not just dismissed as not being real by, of course, more often than not, white and white male individuals who seem to think they have a better understanding of what racism is than a black woman. Honestly, one of the most powerful books I read last year. I mentioned it back in January as the best book I had read during my, I said January, last June, during my midway freakout tag, and it really was quite a powerful experience. It reshaped largely how I see my school. Not fundamentally, but that's a bigger conversation to have, but it also just brings to light the need for action to prevent this kind of stuff, because right now I am at an institution that is complicit, and as a student supporting the school I am also complicit, and I have a certain personal responsibility for my own integrity to try and fight this. And I think part of that, of course, is to first understand the experience, and this is a wonderful way of doing that. That's the gist of my thoughts on that book. Now, before I get to the last book of nonfiction, I want to mention a book that I haven't actually finished. I'm actually reading it right now, and it is amazing. It's called The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescod-Weinstein, and she is a black queer Jewish physicist, cosmologist. And this is her memoir where she talks about a number of different things. She starts off talking about her research, the background of cosmology, and digging a bit into her particular side of the research and how that fits into the conversation at large. And then she transitions into talking about her identity as a black woman, as a Jewish woman, and as a woman in science, and about the science of race, particularly the science of melanin, which is where I'm at right now. It's a really fascinating conversation. And then she's going to be talking about, I think, her experience as a black woman in physics as a whole and about the science community. Which, if you're unaware, there was, I think, a recent study in the last couple of years showing that there was a severe amount of prejudice and discrimination going on for black women in space and planetary sciences, which is the field that I am in myself. It really feeds into the atmosphere that is created at colleges and institutions like the ones that I mentioned before in Attorney Martis' book. Like, how do those things happen? It's because you have an institution that tolerates it, that is built on this kind of fundamental racism, and we don't want to stop and reflect on it, because it's easier just to pretend like it's not there and ignore the fact that there are so many reasons to demonstrate the fact that these things exist. And the story so far is really great. It's just so good to get this perspective in the sciences, and it is just as well told as any other book that I've read. It's probably going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I'd be surprised if it's not at this point. And while she does get into some really detailed science, I still feel like it's told as well as any other scientist. Like, sure, you might struggle a bit with the first few chapters. I still think it's worth the pickup, even if you don't traditionally read science books, for the greater conversation at large. And even if you don't catch everything, I think there's this assumption that when you read a science book, you need to understand everything, every little detail, when I think it's much more about trying to grasp bits and pieces to improve your overall perspective on the science. It's okay if you don't understand everything she's saying. It's about trying to connect to it, at least on some level. And that is, the more you read these kind of books, the more you tend to pick up. And it changes what you get out of a book. But I think too many people are afraid of not understanding everything, and that's perfectly okay when you're reading a book. And to put this book down, which I know some people who are reviewing this have, because of the first few chapters, you're missing so much of the rest. And for God's sake, just skip the first few chapters, or hell, listen to the audiobook. It's very well done. She doesn't narrate herself, but it's still an excellent audiobook, which I should get ahead of myself. I probably will do a standalone review, even though I am also vlogging the experience as well. And this is just an amazing book so far, and it definitely deserves to be bolstered and to be read and considered in Women's History Month and at any point in time. It is just such a perfect addition to anyone who is interested in cosmology or in science or in black woman experience in science at large. Now on to the last nonfiction book. We've Always Been Here by Samra Habib. And this was a book that I read last year for the Canada Reads 2020, and it actually ended up winning Canada Reads 2020. And it is a memoir about a Muslim queer woman who is immigrated to Canada in her childhood, I believe. I think she's from Pakistan, and the book itself deals with her experience as a queer person and a woman in this religion which tends to discriminate on her on both sides. And it's about her, also about her identity as a Muslim woman, immigrant as well. But this one is, I think, much more positive. This talks more about, I think this is more of a hopeful look about trying to not necessarily find yourself by separating yourself from where you come from. It's more about trying to rethink where you come from in a way that makes it fit with who you are. Meaning her religion, instead of rejecting her religion like, say, I have mine, she thinks about her religion in a new way, in a way that reframes it so that it is more inclusive for her as a person, as a queer woman person. And I thought it was really well written, and the queerness that it's really connected to me. Beautiful story, and I guess there's a reason that it won Canada Reads. Now that transitions well into the fiction books that I wanted to mention to you, which first of all is going to be Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha. This is a story about two Indian women who are in a very oppressive society and who find some solace in their friendship that they have with one another. And when they are separated, it becomes this journey for one of them to try and find the other, to try and find some semblance of happiness in the world by having that connection reestablished. And this explores so many issues. There's a lot of trigger warnings to understand here. I'm not going to go through them, but you can look them up if that's something you're concerned about. But it deals with the very oppressive society and also the other types of society that sort of branch off from there. Things relating to like sex trafficking and other dark things that very much exist in our world today. And I found this book very similar to, say, The Handmaid's Tale, and this sort of journey we have, and that's these two women who live in this very oppressive society and how they're trying to just survive and not lose the will to live, and at the same time try to reach out and find that one piece of satisfaction and happiness in the world. And it sort of mirrors Handmaid's Tale in that way, except of course it deals with much more intersectional ideas in the very white feminist approach of Atwood. And it also works as this really well written, I think, thriller novel. It's literary fiction, but I also classify it as somewhat thriller, and it was one of my favorite thrillers of 2019. And honestly, I'm due to reread it, I think. It's just a very beautifully written and powerful and tragic story. Next is going to be the Gilda Story, something I've now read twice. It is by Joelle Gomez. I read this for the live show that I'll be doing with Erica from the Broken Spine, I think this Sunday. And this is about a queer black woman who used to be a slave and becomes a vampire. And it follows her experience as a vampire from obviously when she's first sired or turned into a vampire is what that means, to now into the future. It basically outlines her, it shares with us like her perspective of the world, which helps us better appreciate who she is, but it also reflects on the society itself and how society changes and everything that's going on in the society in that way. Then it doesn't just go to the present, which at the time I think is 1990, but it actually extends into the future to 2020, which obviously we've now passed. And I think, and while it is somewhat dystopianistic in nature, that it really is a real world word, it does explore, or does a really good job, I think, of predicting several very real things that come to pass. And it's a really fascinating story. It's not the best story I've ever read, but it's the reason I've read it twice, and I'm still considering if I want to read it a third time because I feel like there's more depth there for me to appreciate for the discussion, but we'll see if that happens. I do recommend this. It's a great story, great vampire story. It also was like unique for its time to write a story not just about a black woman, but about a black woman vampire, where you're not just reshaping how black women are seen, but how a black woman vampire can be seen, and how they're not necessarily inherently evil. I mean, that is to say vampires. I think at this time, 1990 or so when it was published, you can think of Anne Rice as being very popular then with the Interview with the Vampire, the Vampire Lestat, which was morally great at best, but actually pretty damn evil. But moving on, we're now on to one of my favorite series of all time, which is going to be Mary Robert Kowal's The Calculating Stars, the first book in the Lady Astronauts series. And this here is a alternate history book about a world that suffers a tragic extinction level event impact that doesn't necessarily just knock out the world like that. Instead, what it does is it sends debris into the atmosphere, basically accelerating climate change to the point that Earth will become uninhabitable for people in a matter of decades. So they have to get to space. And the story focuses on this one Jewish engineer and scientist who is the one who basically spearheads this approach, who one convinces and demonstrates how the fact that Earth is going to be warming up and we have to do something now if we want to survive, but two, spearheads the fact that women and people of color need to be included in this process if we have any hope of succeeding. And this story, while it is about space and space travel, it is very much about the idea of diversity and discrimination during this time in ways that really mirror to today as well. And this is just so well balanced in all the different ways. It's exciting and in times plot driven, but also very character focused, and it doesn't obsess over one particular side of the story, and instead it creates a very flushed out story, not just here but across the series. Right now we have 3 books out, and they're getting progressively better in my opinion, and we have a 4th book coming to complete the series, which all of which are a prequel to a short story which I think won a Nebula, maybe a Hugo, back in 2014 called Bloody Astronauts of Mars. The story as a prequel, even just from the title, I think you get some idea where it's going, and I will say that it's fundamentally a story of hope and determination and overcoming obstacles, not just environmental ones, but societal ones like sexism and racism. We're getting close to the end now. This was a longer video than I thought it would be, but A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. And I thought about the different retellings, Greek retellings that I have, and I thought about which one I should include here. There was Circe, which is a fantastic book, well written, and a really new, unique perspective to Circe. And there's also The Silence of the Girls, which is also a feminist look, or feminist take on a sect of the Trojan War, particularly these two individuals that were taken as slaves and married, or maybe concubines rather, to some leaders of the Trojan enemies, I think. But the one that I really connected to the most was this, which was also focusing on the Trojan War retelling, but instead of focusing on these two characters, it focuses on every woman in this conflict on all sides. We're talking commoners who are having to suffer the consequences of the war of these rich people, to the goddesses that are overseeing or watching, and in some ways interacting and influencing the conflict that is happening and how it happened. In a lot of ways, I found this mirroring, or rather similar to the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, which I did enjoy, but I felt like it was not entirely fleshed out. It was a very abbreviated take on the story, and that feeling was particularly strong because I had read it after this, and this feels like it takes that idea and just expands it. Point is that this focuses on the entire conflict, and I love this for a lot of reasons, because not just because of the perspectives we're getting, but because she focuses on so many different conflicts that this could so easily get lost, that we could so easily just get so confused by all the different perspectives we're getting. But instead, I just remember this being told so well, and how all the different conflicts, all the different perspectives rather, they just connect so beautifully, how they flow through the story, and how it's so easy to follow along despite all the different perspectives we're getting in this narrative. This is really good. It was recently released on audio as well, so I'll probably end up rereading that. Now that the audio is out, I actually physically read that one. It's one of the few books I do physically read. And finally, I could not have this list of female authors who empower women and not talk about Octavia E. Butler. And particularly, I decided to read or choose Parable of the Sower, first book of the Parable duology. And this is about a world that is uncannily similar to our own, where it's somewhat dystopian-esque, where climate change is beginning to have a stronger and stronger effect on society, and things are breaking down. We have a fascist in the government who was just elected, who literally uses the slogan, at least in passing, of "we're going to make America great again." That was literally in this book. And so it's kind of dark in that sense, but it's also just very powerful because of that, because of its ability to make such stark predictions and have such a powerful reflection on the world and where the world is likely going. But in doing so, the story centers around this one young black woman, or young black girl, I think, as she starts out, and her intent to survive, her intent to decide, I want to survive in this world, so I'm going to figure out how to do it. And in doing so, she becomes sort of a leader of sorts of this group of people who follow her. And she even creates this religion where God is change. Everything you touch, you change. Everything that you change touches you, or changes you rather. And I love that concept so much. And it's just a really well-written book. And I think it perfectly closes off this list. So this is the entire list of books that I'm talking about. Thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you found this list useful. I know a lot of these are very popular, so hopefully it's not too repetitive from things you've heard before. But thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you think there's a book I should include on this list, as well, a book that is worth talking about, obviously, at any time, but especially during Women's History Month. Okay, have a great day.